Okay, today we're going to look at changing the inner and outer tie rods on a Mustang GT. Tie rods are also called track rods in the UK. So if you're unfamiliar with the term tie rod, the terms track rod are interchangeable here. So in the US we call them tie rods apparently, and there they are. So if you look in there, this is our tie rod here. This is the outer tie rod, this section here, and the inner tie rod goes through that boot, which is this rubber spring right here and connects just behind there. How to know if you have a bad tie rod? Well, you get uneven tire wear, you might get some kind of clicking on the steering wheel. If you take your wheel off, first things first, make your car safe as possible, put it on jack stands, whatever you need to do. This is a bad tie rod. This is a ball joint. This is the inner tie rod, and you can see there is all kinds of play on that. This is a new tie rod. It's very hard to move. That is a solid indication your inner tie rod is done. Another thing to test for with inner tie rods is while it's connected to the car, pull in and out to test this ball joint in here. That is an indication that the inner tie rod is done. The outer tie rod, also called a tie rod end or track rod end, is the other portion of this, and this is the bit that connects to the wheel harness itself. You can see in here it's connected right through here, and this controls the steering mechanism on the car. It's secured by a castle nut there and a pin, and literally just pops out when that is undone there. How to know if you have a bad outer tie rod? With the wheel still attached, grab it 3 and 9 and shake side to side, trying to feel for any unnecessary play there. Another thing is the boot, which is this rubber piece here. There's some kind of cracks in this one. When you have cracks in the boot, it's left open to debris and all other things as well. Our new one actually has a grease fitting, so we can grease this with a grease gun just on the top there. I'll show you how to do that later. So when the grease finally flushes out of here, you can see in here, it's just a ball joint in there. You can actually use a grease gun on that and refill it, so we never really get dry or grittiness in there. We can kind of flush it out. So that's our replacement one. This is the old one. It's not too bad actually. The ball joint's still really nice. There is a crack in this boot here. You could just replace the boot, but I bought a inner and outer tie rod kit off eBay for $20, so I figure I'm going to replace the outer and the inner. I know the inner was really shot. I've actually already changed the right side already. We're just doing the left side now, so this is from the right side. So I figure I'll do the outer ones as well. I mean, the boot's damaged. It was only $20, so let's have a look how we can change our tie rods. Okay, first thing to do when we're changing our tie rods, we're going to actually start with the outer tie rod here, because this is our starting point. We can't do the inner tie rod without doing the outer one. The inner tie rod, you need a special tool. This is called a inner tie rod toolkit. You can actually get this for free, well, for 5 days from Pep Boys. I think AutoZone do a similar thing, and it will help you get the inner tie rod off easier. But it's really just a glorified wrench, that's all it is. With the Mustang GT, you actually do have a lot of room under here. If you just look under there, it's kind of hard to see, we'll look a bit later. You actually have enough room to get a wrench on there. So do you need this? Not necessarily. Do you have a really good wrench? If you do, then you probably don't need to bother with this. As long as you have a good wrench and some leverage, which you do have room for on a 2003 Mustang GT, you do not really need this tool. As we rented it for absolutely nothing, we figured we might as well save ourselves the effort. And our wrench isn't actually that amazing, as you can see. So, inner tie rod, you don't need that for the outer tie rod. So, let's begin with the outer. That's this little fella here. if we look just behind the brake disc, you can see how the outer tie rod right here connects to the harness right here. This is what's securing it in place. This is called a split pin, or in the US it's called a cotter pin, I believe. You literally have to get this split pin out, get some pliers in there, that's always a good thing. So once you remove the split pin in there, there we go. You can't, you could reuse that, but your outer tie rod does come complete with a new split pin. If it doesn't, then this one looks pretty straight to reuse. The next thing is to get this castle nut off, so get a wrench on that. It shouldn't be too tight as it's torqued in, well it should have been, so get a wrench on that and pop that off. Alright, we've unscrewed the castle nut. It's pretty easy to undo actually. Really depends who's been messing with your car before, but it doesn't look like these have ever been changed. So usually when you put the castle nut on, it's torqued in, so it was pretty easy to get off there. It's called a castle nut because it looks like a pancake, only joking, it looks like a castle. So the next thing you want to do, there is a tool you can use to get this off, but really it's just held in there with a bit of seize. It's been there so long. What you want to do is get a mallet and just give that a bit of a whack on there. A rubber mallet might be good so you don't damage any threads or anything on there. What some people do is put the castle nut on a little bit and hit that down, so the whole thing doesn't just suddenly hit the floor and you don't damage anything. I got my trusty mallet. I've done the other one. I know they're pretty seized up on here, so just give that a bit of a whack. It's pretty stubborn. Give me one sec. I had to put the camera down there to give it a good solid whack, but it's finally resisted the mallet of doom. Here's the mallet of doom. It's ready to finish it off there. There we go, and that should drop straight out. And you can see it's basically keeping this steering system in place, which raises the danger. If your tie rods accidentally snap, then look what can happen to your car on the road. No control. And in a convertible Mustang with no roll bars, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. Yeah, you will be pretzel shaped. And if you survive, you may earn a nickname you might not want people to call you. So if you look in here, this is how we can test our inner tie rod. Very loose, lots of play. Kind of like this one I showed you earlier. More play than a children's playground at lunchtime. Yeah, so we're going to change the inner tie rod here. Very simple, very simple. So this is how to check for the inner tie rod. It's the last thing you really do if you're really unsure. Pull this out. Yeah, it is done. Our outer tie rod, if you look a little closely, it looks like the same condition as the other one. Really needs a new boot on there. It's very dry. We're in Vegas at the moment, so the temperatures get very hot, so things like this and car batteries don't really last very long here. So what we want to do now is loosen this bolt here, and to do that we should pop it back in the steering rack here. Thank you very much. So pop that in there, and while you undo this bolt, that will give it a bit of support. Okay, finally loosened this nut off a little bit here. If you just yeah, get in there. Boy, it was a bugger. It's an absolute bugger, but yeah, we loosened it. So don't really go anywhere with it yet, just kind of leave it snug against the outer tie rod there. Because if we're only changing the outer tie rod, do check that your new outer tie rod is the same length, and that won't throw off your tracking. Tracking is kind of like the toe of a vehicle, the alignment. So say this is the road going from here down there, your toe will be the wheel position that kind of tilts this way. What toe does, it gives you more control at a higher speed. If they're kind of inwards like this, I believe that's positive toe. There's also negative toe also, but really it'll just throw off your tracking, because if the new one is a bit longer, then it's going to push your wheel outwards a little more, and it's going to affect the position of your wheel on the road. So the first thing you want to do when changing any of this stuff is to book an appointment at your mechanic and get your car aligned. That is the first thing you should do as soon as you change the inner, outer, or any of this stuff, because it will throw off the tracking of your vehicle. And your tie rods may be great, but it will cause uneven tire wear just because they're not tracked properly with the road and the car. So that's the first thing you should do. I'm telling you that now so you can plan ahead and try and use your phone with some oily hands. That'll be great. So if you're only changing the outer tie rod, leave this nut snug against the outer tie rod, and that will track the position of where your outer tie rod is on here. So, but because in this video I'm changing the inner and the outer, I need to count the number of turns until this slips off. So if I'm only changing the outer, you don't need to count the turns, just kind of leave the nut where it is, because you'll be putting a new one right back on and it will just go to the same position at the nut. But because we're changing the inner tie rod, we need to count the number of turns until this comes off. So it's nice and snug right now. So that's 1, that's 2, 3. The other one was 29, so I'm curious if it's going to be the same. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 20 on that side, 29 on the other. What does that tell you? Well, when you get your alignment checked, you'll soon find out. So here's the outer tie rod, just popped off. It seems like the same kind of condition as the other one. It doesn't really feel gritty when I move the ball joint around, but there is a hole in the boot, and a hole in the boot means grit and other things get in there, contaminates the grease and makes your ball joint not very smooth. And the point of a ball joint is to have it very kind of isolated from contaminants, and it has to operate smoothly. So it does kind of feel nice, but you don't know what's got caught in there, so I would throw it away. Okay, so now we've taken the outer tie rod off there. If you want to just replace the outer one, like I said, here it is right here. Screw it all the way back onto the nut and reverse the process. Because we're changing the inner one, the next thing we need to do is in here we have another boot, very long, looks kind of like an accordion. On the front here there's a bit of a clasp. Get some long nose pliers on there and that should pop right off. So I have medium nosed pliers, which hopefully is good enough. Now we'll need to put the camera down while I get a good grip on that. Okay, so I've just put the pliers on there and just screws these together. It kind of just popped off the end of the boot there. The idea of this is so that contaminants and things don't get inside there and ruin our ball joint, which is inside the end of the inner tie rod there. So it acts as kind of like a clamp to protect things from going up in there. And you can slide this all the way off. We're gonna hopefully reuse this boot here, mainly because our inner tie rod didn't come with this boot, and you might find when you order yours won't either. So I'm praying that there's no kind of cuts and rips in here, and I'll have to end up ordering another one of these. So that's the plan. So what we're gonna do is take this nut off completely. Do remember the number of turns it took to get your outer tie rod off there. Okay, so we can take this bolt off and also take this clamp off too. We're going to reuse both of them, your inner tie rod will come with this nut. Your outer tie rod may also come with this nut too, so you're going to end up with 3 of them, 2 new ones and the one already on the car. It seems that the one they ship with the inner and outer tie rods, they're kind of thin, they don't look as very durable. There's not really much that can go wrong with the nut, but this one is a lot thicker, so we're actually going to reuse this one here. And also we're going to reuse this clamp too, and hopefully reuse the boot, but we have to get the boot off. So we're going to get that little boot-shaped accordion thing off there and assess the damage to it really, then hopefully we can reuse this. Alright, check that out. This is the inner tie rod. We're getting a little bit dirty now under here actually. We also have a little bit of an oil leak. Hopefully it's not serious, but anyway, irrelevant. The boot on the inner tie rod, which is all of this thing here, looks like a very bad musical instrument, is held on to the car by a tiny little clamp right here. It's a metal clamp. It's kind of like a one use only kind of deal. Here is the one from the other side. You use kind of something similar on PEX piping, so if you're a plumber you may be kind of familiar with one of these. But what we're going to do, we're going to get our screwdriver in this little hole here and just pry that bad boy off. We're going to replace it with one of those heavy duty zip ties, very thick one. If you don't have a heavy duty zip tie, maybe you can use 2 medium duty zip ties, but to be honest, what this does is protects contaminants from getting inside the boot. If you do get contaminants inside the boot, then it goes in the ball joint, and that can affect your inner tie rod joint. And it may be beneficial to put a good kind of clamp or zip tie on this, which will prevent you from doing this all over again. Unless you find it kind of fun, then by all means. But there we go. So that's dropped off there. There's the other one. There is one thing I want to mention while we're under here. At the end of this boot there's a rod, this rod here. It goes all the way to the other boot on the other side of the car. So this kind of connects right over to the other one by this rod here. What this rod does, it kind of keeps the boots at the same kind of sort of compression level, or how you would word that, and also kind of make sure the same spacing is between them, and this also prevents like contaminants and various things from getting in here also. I don't know about many other cars, but typically I see them on the top, and on the GT it almost rests on these little kind of pegs there, so if you're wondering what that is, that's kind of what it's for. And there's a little slot on this boot where it actually goes into, but we're going to take this boot off and get a bit of a closer look. But this rod, if it just falls down and you kind of like, oh, where did this rod come from, that's actually where it comes from. So it's actually connected to the boot right here, it just slips in. So let's get this boot off. So we've taken both clamps off the boot, one at the front, one at the back there. So what we want to do now is try and get this boot off as carefully as possible, because we want to reuse it. So what we do, we get kind of like a flat head and just slowly pry it under the front. There's a little notch in this inner tie rod and it kind of gets stuck on that. So what we kind of have to do is get a flat head gingerly under there and kind of pull it off. It's really hard to do with a camera in my hand, but you get the idea. Very simple. Oh, check it out. Okay, the boot's just come off. We've got a bit of leakage right there. I'm sure that's grease from who knows how long ago. Yeah, these are in need of changing, alright. You can see the ball joint in the inner tie rod there. I'm really surprised it hasn't fallen off. Let's look in here. The other way, as I mentioned briefly before, testing the inner tie rods is to push them in and out and really test this ball joint right here. It's very loose, and I can kind of push it in and out a bit, and you can hear a little suction as well. Another thing to check is for kind of grittiness, to see if any contaminants got in here. But I mean, I know mine's busted, so this is coming right off. But that's a few things you should test. In here, this is the rod I was talking about. This was plugged into the boot. It's still plugged in the other boot over there, so we're just going to rest it on this nut here while we sort this side out. Behind here is a small plastic clip. You can just kind of push that back a little bit just to put it out of the way. And we're going to get our tool on this to get this off. It really just unscrews. You can get a wrench right here, so you can see it has flat edges here. The Mustang GT 2003, I believe years 99 to 2004. I'm not 100%, but they have the same kind of system and parts, so they should be also the same. So you can get a wrench on here. You see there's a lot of room to work. Just get a wrench on there and undo it. There's just a screw joint right in there, and this unscrews right off. We're going to use our tool since we rented it for free. Why not? Get a lot more leverage that way, and it should be a lot more easier to do this. So let's have a look at doing that. But before we do that, we're just going to inspect our boot to make sure there are no rips, tears or contaminants or anything like that. I'm actually just gonna maybe wash it out a little bit to make sure any grit that may have got in there is gone. It could be a good thing to do, especially if you reuse any parts at all. It's good to make sure all the grittiness is out of there. The tube I was talking about, that just goes right in here. It's really just to hold it in place. It doesn't actually connect inside the tube in any way. So that's all that's for. Just remember that goes in there when you're done. You don't really want this hanging off and dragging on the road while you're driving. So there's a few things to remember when you're putting things back again. So we're going to wash the boot off a little bit, check for tears. I do actually think it looks really good, so we're going to reuse it. And then we're going to use our tool to take the inner tie rod off, which is a simple wrench off kind of movement to the left. So the next fun part of our expedition is getting this inner tie rod off. That will be the part where you probably hurt yourself the most. I think I've already done that many times. There's a nice gash on the finger there. So have fun with that. So like I said, you can either use this inner tie rod toolkit right here. It's very nice. I borrowed this from Pep Boys for free. I'm planning on returning it. But what you can do is also get a wrench on this inner tie rod and do it like that. Obviously your wrench should be better than this. This probably won't work. You can see the other one is still attached where we left it. And this is from the other side of the vehicle, so what we want to do is really undo this, so just turn it left. With these, they're kind of 3 standard sizes in this kit. Luckily this one is a good match. It just really slips over there. You get the big pole here, bad boy pole, slip that all the way on through there. That connects to the piece right there. Very hard to do with one hand. And that, once it's in, you can turn the inner tie rod off right there. So it just gives you kind of leverage. It's like a big glorified wrench really. So that kind of gets these two, crimps it. And you really just turn this using a standard wrench, because in the end there's your square hole. So you're really just turning this whole thing to the left and undoing this tie rod. Good news is that my boot is very nice. I've given it a good clean up, so there's no going to be no contaminants when I reuse this on the new inner tie rod. So the next fun part is to undo this bad boy with whatever tools we have and see how it goes and minimize the injuries this time. Okay, so here's what the setup kind of looks like. You got your big old wrench on the end there. You got your kind of tie rod kit going down there, and I have loosened it. Hey, we got it good this time, and literally just undo it off there, and the inner tie rod will slip right off. Okay, so we've got it off. It's pretty much done for. It's kind of ready for the trash, or maybe you can just throw it really far to get the last bit of money out of it. I don't know. Here's the new one, very solid. I can't even move this ball joint on the end. It's already kind of pre-greased, good to go really. I did check they're the same length, the part I ordered, which is great, and the outer tie rods are also the same length, so the tracking shouldn't be amazingly off when we install these, which is very good. One thing I do want to mention is that a lot of vehicles, not this one, they have pins inside here. So if you're watching this video, you will notice some holes here. The Mustang GT 2003 and 2009 to 2004 years do not have these pins. This is a stock one, came right off there. Don't have the pins on there. So before you use your inner tie rod toolkit, you want to get the pins out. What you normally do is get a flat head under the pin and just hit it out with a bit of a mallet. Your new one will come with new pins here. They kind of look like rivets. Pretty much are rivets, I guess. You use like a rivet gun to get that in there, and that will install the pins in all these holes. And what that does is when you screw this back into the car, it gives it an added sort of layer of security, so it doesn't maybe untwist or pop out while you're driving. But like I said, it's an extra safety kind of measure. So if you're wondering why the pins were included with your new inner tie rod, that is why. So you can pop those in there, get a gun on there, pop them in. Pretty easy to do. The hard thing is actually removing one of these with the pins in. You really just need to knock those out, and they're not reusable, so don't worry if you break your pins on the way out. So yeah, here's our old one. We're going, and we're going to install this new one. Before we install the new one, you might want some kind of thread seal on there, any special fluids in there. Some people just screw them right in, but you have the option of putting that in there. You can see where it came out of. Very nice and dirty down here. Simple like screw threaded thing right here. It does look really nice. There's nothing wrong with that. So we're just gonna slip our new one back on. And kind of like the reverse method, we took it off. So just do it kind of finger tight on here, and then get your toolkit or wrench or however you got the other one off, and tighten it up. Pretty much with the tool, there's only so much tightness you can get on this, so just go for it. Alright, so I've tightened this as much as I can with the crappy tool I rented. It's actually not that bad. Move your little thing back there, and the next thing you want to do is get your boot back on. This is a new inner tie rod, so the bolt's probably already on there, so you want to take that off. You can't get your boot on with anything on there, so let's take that off. So we're ready to slide the boot back on. As I mentioned, the boot's nicely clean now. I've put a zip tie on there, so I can just kind of slide it on and tighten it up. If you look on the other side of the boot, there's a nice little groove for the zip tie. You just want to make sure that this is lined up with your your pole which connects to the other boot, which I mentioned earlier. So let's slide the boot back on there. Okay. Now let's get some light in it. Okay, now you can see that's where the boot was because of the nice lining of grease. So what we want to do is try and get the boot on there as much as possible. I did get a rag on the end of there, so we're not just pushing contaminants back in there. So I just want to push that on there. There we go, that's nice and snug. So we've got a zip tie down here that we can tighten up. I put the end down here so we have as much room as possible to work with while tightening that zip tie. And here's our pole. Just double check it's still plugged into the other boot on the other side of the car. And all we have to do is just put this in this little nozzle there, and then both boots are connected up. Okay, so we're all zip tied. Beautiful job there. The rod's back in the boot just there, and you can probably just see it connecting to the other boot over there as well. And it's resting on these kind of little nuts up there. So that's exactly how we left it. Zip ties on there. The next thing to do here is to put your little clamp back on this end of the boot. So we've protected contamination from this side, we now need to do it to this side. It's a pretty good seal when you know there's hardly any air going out there, so that's pretty good. So let's put the clamp back on this side, and it is really annoying to do. Okay, so the next bit is putting our little clip back, which is actually really annoying. It's really easy getting it off. You kind of have to squeeze these three together. You can't do it with your fingers, but the boot slides that way, and it's crazy. There's a little trick here I use, which is instead of grabbing it like that way to squeeze them, try grabbing it that way instead. So kind of like grabbing it this way, you get a lot more control, and you can actually open it up a lot more, which is really hard doing it the other way. So, and then if you use the space down here towards the floor, you can slip it easily over the end of the boot there. Okay, it actually went on there first time, which is great. I didn't even need to pause the video. But that's all on there. It's nice and solid, nice and debris tight. So the next thing we want to do is put on our outer tie rod and the nut, obviously, and connect it back up. So we're nearly home. Okay, so I briefly mentioned before, here's our old nut and here's our new nut that came with the kit. The old one has a lot more threads, has more depth to it, so we're going to use this. Put this one in your toolbox for a later date. So what we're going to do with this now is put it back on here. And when we took off the outer tie rod, I'm hoping you remember the number of turns. I believe this side was 20. So it doesn't really matter how much we do this nut right now. The key thing is that we put our outer tie rod back on 20 turns and make sure the nut is snug to it. So that's what we're going to do now. So before we put our outer tie rod back on, I mentioned briefly before that our new outer tie rod has a grease fitting there, and it should come with a fitting that looks just like that. It's also called a grease nipple. Kind of looks like a nipple. what you do, you get a grease gun on the end of here and pump some grease in every time, well, supposed to, every time you have an oil change. I'm sure no one actually does unless they're really into cars, but you get the idea. So what you do is screw in the nipple into the top of the outer tie rod there. Very delicate and very hard to do with the camera in my hand. Okay, and once the nipple's been screwed in, just get some pliers on there and just grip it tight. Don't go crazy. And your grease nipple has been fitted. So when it's attached to your car, just give it a bit of grease in there, and the old grease will sort of purge out of the bottom there. This is just a ball joint in there, so it will kind of just squirt out, or you know, that's kind of what it does there. And the new bush actually looks really good actually. Yeah. So we're gonna put the outer tie rod on here. So in the tie rod's ready to go. Make sure it's kind of snug in the first fitting, so you pull on it, it's not coming out, okay, and then count your turns backwards. So with this one it was 20, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 19 and 20. Oh, it's starting to rain, we better hurry up. Okay, bring this bolt back snug to the outer tie rod there. So we've done our 20 turns, so bring the bolt nice and snug. You want to get this a little tight towards here, don't go crazy, but put this back in here just so you can get a nice bit of sturdiness as you tighten this back on there. Okay, so outer tie rod on, all connected up. Make sure it's ready, kind of semi-loose on this nut here, so we just have a little wiggle room to get it back in our socket here. Let's bring this in, just there. Might be a little harder to remove now because we have a nice great inner tie rod on there, so you might find it's a tiny bit more of a struggle to move this around, but that's a good thing, right? So let's line this up. A little bit tricky, but it should just come straight through there as it was before. Okay, and once you've done that, you can see it just pushes up through there. The boot there is pushing up on there, which is nice, just as it was before. And now that's in place, we can just give this a bit of a tighten. So get a little wrench on that and just bring this nut snug to the outer tie rod, just how it was before. And then we can proceed with our castle nut and pin, and we're almost ready to go. Okay, very simple. We've put the castle nut back on there, make it snug and then give it a bit extra. There's some torque specs online, I'm sure. Make sure your split pin hole in there lines up with one of the turrets on the castle, well, the missing turret part, just so it slips in nice and easy. Once that's in place, just give this a bit of a tighten, don't go crazy. And now your split pin's in, just literally bend the ends around here, and then we are good to go. So let's give it a whirl, huh? So that's it, the split pin's back in there, also known as a cotter pin in the US. So we've bent the ends back there, you can just kind of see it chill in there. Did a bit of a job on it actually. We just pushed this plate back a bit, I kind of moved it forward to get a bit of access. So there's our nice new outer and inner tie rods. Do remember to go straight down the mechanic's place, workshop, whatever. Get your alignment sorted. Your toe is going to be off. Actually, a lot of things might be off, but take your car for a little journey down the road. Don't bounce straight on the freeway unless you have total faith in your work. I'm not a registered mechanic or anything, it's just things I've picked up along the way. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it's helped you out replacing your inner and outer tie rods for a Mustang GT. Like I said, years 99 to 2004 should all be compatible with this exact method. Other cars you'll find there are a lot of similar things going on here too. Sometimes this might be going downwards instead of upwards, but the basic sort of principles are typically the same. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed the video and happy riding. One final thing, here are the part numbers of the for the tie rods. This is the tie rod end, also known as the outer tie rod, track rod in the UK. So that's the part number there, and for the inner one here, like I said, I got 2 outers and 2 inners. The outers come with the bushes, spare castle nut, split pin, and both of them come with a nut here. All of that, all 4 pieces for $20 on eBay, using these part numbers. So, and they're pretty good actually. I've also installed some in another vehicle, and they've been very trustworthy. So, and also, not to mention, they come with a grease nipple down here. So do remember to get a grease gun on this and pump it full of grease every time you have an oil change, and you will have nice healthy ball joints in your tie rod ends. So take care.